Hello and welcome back to the Demis Hellen channel. We're back with another Arpeggio episode. If you want to watch these earlier than everybody else on YouTube, you can consider becoming a patron. They get a week's access to this video beforehand and the resources from this video as well. So that is an option for you there. Now, we're going to be looking at the Dorian scale in this episode, and it's great for that sort of like uplifting, euphoric vibe, and I'm just going to show you how that works. So without further ado, let's jump in. So now that you know what we're creating here, let's get building the idea. Now, this is part of a template that I'm building for Born to Produce at the moment. So it's an Uplifting Trance template. Everything you've heard, including the drums, the bass, that's all part of the template. I'm just building a different melody for this. That comes out at the end of June. So if you want to get notified about that, head over to borntoproduce.com or even just check me out here on there. And I'll be sending a mailer out as well when it comes out. Anyway, enough waffling. Let's jump into here. So this is the pattern that we're going to be using, and we're using the A Dorian scale. So we're using the Dorian mode. So it's going to be very similar to the Aeolian mode, which is the natural minor, but we're going to have a slight change. So we're going to pick Dorian down here. And the reason I'm using the scale assistant, as usual, is to signify visually to you that when a note turns orange on screen, it's not in the scale. All right. So A Dorian is the same as A minor bar one note. So I'm just going to lay out the scale for you here so you can just copy this down. And you can see the difference is the F sharp. So A minor is usually all white notes, A to A. So it'll look like this. But as you can see in Dorian, this is not corrected. We are now sharpening that F, and that's what gives us that elevation, that euphoric feel, if we use it in the right way. So I'm going to delete that. This is the pattern. Let's have a quick chat about this. Let's get it here. So what's happening is I'm going to break this down into two sections. If we copy these over here to this bar, copy this over to this bar so you can see them in isolation. Over here, you can see we're using an eighth dotted rhythm here, and we know it's in eighth notes because if we double this, I'm working in 16ths here. That's why they're split up into 4 in each beat. When I make those eighth note long, you can see it's an eighth dotted rhythm. It's just giving it a bit of bounce. So an eighth standard rhythm would be like this. So it'd just be bunched eighth notes next to each other. This is an eighth dotted. That's just giving you that bounce. So you get the idea. Very, very common. And then all we're doing with the other notes is filling in the gaps using 16ths. So when you piece those together, that's our pattern. So very, very simple, nothing too extravagant, and that's how we like it here on the channel. Nice and simple to learn. So we're going to bring this across, and we're going to make 4 bars of that pattern, just copying them across. And we're going to start building the chord structure. So for this one, if I remember rightly from memory, I built, because I've already built this track in my head, this one was starting on an A. I think it moves up to a C, then to a G, and then I'm sure it goes to D there on the first time round anyway. So with that, that is what we're going to be building with our bass line. So all I'm going to do is grab everything. You can see we're starting, sorry, on here as well. I'm making a mess of this with the mouse. These notes here are all based on the scale, so the position. So we've got an A, and then we've got a C at the top. So instead of having A and A like that, we've got A and C. So that's just building on like a standard triad chord. We talk about these all the time. I try to keep it as simple as possible. So a standard triad would look like this. So we skip a note in the scale. So that would be skipping the B and jump into C. Now you can see these are all wrong here, so I'm just going to remove them. And then we skip a note, it's E. We skip a note, B. Skip a note in the scale, F sharp. So that is the start of a standard triad. We're using the first and third note of the scale, and then add the fifth in for the standard triad. Miss a note, add. Miss a note, add. Same for this one. and the same for that one. So there are chords that we're working. And you can see here that we've got a minor, major, major, major chord. So we're working in a very different style to what we usually do. A lot of the times I work more in that minor, but you can see we start in a minor and then we work through in major chords. And that's identified by the note position. So you can see here there's 2-note gap for minor and a 3-note gap there for the major. Nice and simple. So let's get rid. In fact, we'll keep them as reference just for now. I'm going to move these 2 notes. That's how I've got the C up there, by the way. That is A and C. So it's using that 3rd note of the scale in the standard triad. And that's where we start here. It helps to give it a bit of elevation to start with. If you start on A, same as the bass, it's more resolved. It sounds more relaxed, whereas on the 3rd note of that scale, it sounds a little bit more, it's got a bit of tension in there. Essentially, it's itching to go somewhere, and that's what we're trying to create here, movement. Now, I'm going to grab these. Let's just zoom in a bit, and we're going to move up to this C here. So I'm grabbing both. Move up the bass up to C, and as you can see, it's not quite right there, so I'm just going to shift that to E, and I know it's E because that is the 3rd note in that particular scale. So when I say 3rd note in the scale, it's not the 3rd note. If we look at A here and C, that C is the 3rd note because it's A, B, and C, whereas this, I'm referring to the 3rd note or the 3rd of that particular chord. So now it's C, D, E. That's the 3rd of that particular chord position. And then we go down to G. So we need A, B. So we need to shift this up to B, and that's how we know where we're shifting them. And then finally, D, and we know that we've sharpened the F. So shift that up to the F sharp, and that is our little elevation, the use of the Dorian scale there. Okay, so I'm just going to shift these out of sight just for a second. So we've got them there for reference if we need them. But you can hear there, I think that goes a little bit too high. Maybe as an end point that would work. But I'm just going to shift that down 1 octave so we get it sort of like dropping down. It gives it a whole different energy, and the reason for that is because we're sort of rising, so you can see the notes going up, then they're going down, and then they go back up. So if that was over here, you'd see it sort of go up, down, up. So you're moving and creating a story as you're moving. With that one, it's kind of, if you did it as we had there, it's going up, down, up, down, up. So it's a little bit more linear, but it just goes that little bit too high with that F there, that F sharp. So I prefer it to be just that little bit lower down. So the secondary version of this, in fact, that's just copied in the wrong location. So if we move on to the second portion of this, just to keep it nice and simple, we're going to start by shifting this down at the start to B. So we're starting on the 2nd, and that's going to create a little bit of difference in our melody. We know that it's developing a smidge, and that's just going to give it some direction. Okay, and then how we can change this up is we could maybe incorporate, instead of the 3rd note of that chord, add the 5th note of that chord. So we're going to miss a note in the scale and add a note, which is going to be G. So let's just see how this sounds. So now we're jumping into that sort of inception territory where the notes are sort of jumping from low to high, and that gives it a lot of movement. So it doesn't sound right going back to B here because we've already had it. So I'm going to try and stick the 5th note in this one as well of that. So it's G and B. So now we're going to miss a note and add one, which is D. So that works quite nice, but it doesn't quite revolve around too nice there. But if we listen to that in context of going back here. that works okay. Now, it's open to development. I'm not doing this and developing this into the perfect melody. This is giving you the building blocks to do that yourself. That's what these episodes are about. But you can see just manipulating the same chords using different notes in those chords. So we're using the third note of that chord, and then here we're using the fifth note to give it an even higher elevation. But that sounds right, but we might want to utilize what I call the half steps that we use a lot here. So that G and then F, using that Dorian part, might just give us it there, and then we can alternate that final chord to bring it back round to the beginning and just give it a little bit of difference. That works well, but we don't need that F hitting twice, even though we have got a different note in the bass. So looking at the beginning, we've got A. We've got a G here, and then we've got a G here. So we can't use that just to give it a nice little rise back to the A like that. So I'm just looking at ways where we can shift that. And there are standard patterns that we can use, but I'm just looking at what we've got, and I'm going to see if we can opt for an F in the bass. So we're half stepping in the bass, half stepping in the melody at the top a bit earlier, and then this note is wrong, so I'm just going to do that. Can you hear how that gives it a little bit of a weird sort of like dissonant tone to it? So you could make a really sort of aggressive melody using that. That's quite a nice tone, but not quite fitting with the uplifting element here, the happy vibes. So I'm going to opt for E on here. So if we put this on E as well, so the third note of an E is going to be G. So we could opt for this. I think the E is wrong here, but let's just give it a shot. Miss a note, add a note. That is our fifth of that chord. Sounds nice, but it doesn't resolve well enough for me in that instance. So we could opt for this again, just see what it sounds like with a different note. That could work. It's still got that darker tone because of that half step into the Dorian mode again, because we're kind of shifting from the A minor to Dorian, and then Dorian again, sort of mimicking the bass and the melody there. So that's quite nice. But if you want to go for a more conventional style with this, I would avoid doing that. But remember, the F sharp and B work quite nice. I'm going to go for the same, but I'm going to go for D. So we're mimicking this, but we're going higher, but we're going to use a different note. So you can see we've used the third on that one. We're going to use the A, which is the fifth of that particular chord. So let's try that. So can you hear now that gives it that nice uplifting resolve? The other one sounded a little bit darker and just a little bit more, or it's just more unique really, but that sounds a bit better. Now, how I visualize this, and I don't see many people explaining it in this way because I do it quite a unique way. I follow a chord pattern, but I also look at how that shape, not just on screen, but look how is that shaping audibly to me. And what I'm doing here is I'm spacing the notes out. So when you're doing orchestral music, for example, you're going to create open chord structures, and that then gives you a chance to weave other sounds in between those elements. So that's what we're doing here. We're giving the chance for the bass line acids to weave in and out of this melody. There's lots of gaps between these notes. Like this one is the highest gap, so it's giving a lot of space for call and answer patterns in there maybe and stuff like that. So it's always thinking ahead of what we're going to be doing there, not just making the melody sound good. But you can see here it goes so far away from each other, these distances. We need to rein it back in to bring it back in line with this part at the front. Now you can see here I squash it down. We've got A and C, but we've got D and A. So you can see if we was to put them next to each other, I'll just get rid of these chords now. If we go back to that starting position, which is A and C, you can see what's happening is we're going wide, we're shrinking it in, and then opening it back up. So it helps with resolve as well. So the notation works and is important, but also sometimes how we compress that chord back down or melody and bass in our case, how we compress it back down, then expand it again. So there's all different ways that you can do with that. And a lot of these techniques, nothing's new. It's just the style that I approach with. It's very classic, but at the same time, sometimes I put my own stamp on there as well. So there we are. I'm doing a bit of waffling. That is your chord structure. Now, let's just get this in the right position here. I'm going to layer this up with the other sound that you heard in the beginning. So I did say that was going to be the end. I've just done a quick listen through. In context, it's not quite working. That B sounds okay on its sort of isolation, but after running from here to here, it doesn't quite work. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a little bit of a bridge. I'm just going to take those last two notes up. So one's not enough to bridge it through. Two will make it work. And I'm going to put that back to C. And let's just see how that pans out. And we don't need that bit on the end, I've just remembered, because that was me demonstrating that. But you can hear that works a lot better. Still not quite right, but it's open to interpretation for you as a producer and composer to expand on those ideas, just giving you that initial idea. Now, there was something that I wanted to try here as well, just transposing this G up. So then we're sort of squashing at the top and squashing even more here. So we're still compacting the gap here, just not as much. It could work, but I'm just going to leave it there for simplicity. And then just to add a little bit more syncopation, zoom in, turn off your grid snapping, and just bring these note lengths down on the bass to give it a bit more syncopation. Leaving those top notes longer, obviously, to draw more attention to those. Then that layered up with the other one. Obviously you can choose your own sounds, but you can see I'm using uplifting lead 20 and uplifting lead 17. It's just not been renamed there, so I'll just rename that from my Ultimate Vital collection. So you can grab those presets there if you need. Now, give me 2 seconds. I'm going to add all the rest of the elements in so you can hear it in context with a full track build. And with the power of editing, here we are with a little bit of context with the drums, bass, and some effects. So there we are, that is the end of the video. If you're a Patreon supporter, you get access to that MIDI for free. You can just download it as a resource. And if you are just following on YouTube, you can just copy that off screen and make your own melody as you wish. So thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, ask away in the comments. And if you want to see more videos like that, don't forget to hit subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. Look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Take care.